This video you're about to see is from Derrik Chinn and I. We did this over last summer. We spoke on a panel at San Diego Startup Week for a group of American entrepreneurs with interest in Tijuana. And the topic was Tijuana over the last 150 years, and basically what started Tijuana as we know it, having been American investors. So from the years 1885 and onward, and most of the information is all from this book, Tijuana and History, Just Crossing the Border. So if you're interested in Tijuana, knowing about the history of that, I strongly encourage reading this book. And this video you're about to see, Derrik and I, we chat about what it's like being Americans living in Tijuana, working there, and all the fabulous, awesome things about it, of which my wife and I miss so much right now because we're here in Pennsylvania. I'm recording this December, so it's cold. It's actually snowing outside. So we love Tijuana. We miss Tijuana. This is going to be our last video for Immersion Living, and we're pursuing other things here from now. But please enjoy this video. And for any of you Americans who are looking into Tijuana, looking to live there, we strongly encourage it. And go hit up Derrik Chinn from Turista Libre and go and do some of those tours and get to know Tijuana even better from that. Enjoy. I want to hear who this handsome gentleman is over here to my right
Comedy
first.
hour already started. My name is Derrik. My name is Derrik Chinn, and I am with Turista Libre, which is a alternative tour company in Tijuana. But we now have service in Mexico City and other regions of the country as well. We've been in operation for 10 years. I always start our tours or our trips with a simple question: who speaks Spanish? Yeah, awesome. Who speaks no Spanish? You didn't raise your hand. Are you abstaining? Yeah? Could you tell us what the name Turista Libre means? No? Okay. Some people usually try, so they can guess. Yeah, so Turista Libre means free tourist, but free not in the monetary sense, right? More in the liberated sense. So we offer liberated opportunities for foreigners or for outsiders and sometimes even Mexicans to come and enjoy what I think is a very misunderstood place that has been my home for 12 years now. Mm-hmm. So that's what I do. The themes of our tours, they change every weekend. It could be a street art tour, it could be an architecture tour, it could be a flea market tour. We've been doing a new one called the Meals of Migrants, which is really timely right now because of everything happening in the news. Mm-hmm. It's a progressive meal that takes you to 2 different regional Mexican eateries in different parts of the city, and then also 1 international. So it could be a Chinese restaurant, it could be a Haitian restaurant, it could be a Honduran restaurant. But that's the idea with Turista Libre. And right down to the experience, if you got a sticker, the logo has a bus on it, which on this side of the border is a school bus, right? But as you probably all know, on the other side of the border is a public transit vessel. So that's part of the added touch of authenticity as well, too. So
I will vouch as just an average person who, before doing Immersion Living Tijuana, I actually attended to Derrik's events, the Lucha Libre match, which I think was like 3 years ago, right as I had moved to Tijuana, and the vegan taco tour, which was
things like that.
Which was so good. And this was after I was already living there, and so I figured, I know everywhere Derrik's gonna take us. And I didn't. So there's a lot of great variety for an American who goes there for their first time, but then even for someone who's like me, American, and I've been living there for over 3 years, that there's still some cool stuff to see.
Yeah. Do you all cross regularly? Yeah? How often? Like more than once a week?
We live in Tijuana.
You live in Tijuana? Okay, cool. What time did you leave your house today? Because I left an hour ago and I'm in there. I felt miraculous. Yes, yeah, the lifesaver, right? Yeah, the fast pass. Has anyone never been before? You're the only one. Okay, wonderful. We hope to see you sometime over
The
there
moment
soon.
we're done with this, you need to go to Tijuana. It's just so,
Yeah.
It's so great.
And the fact that we have a lot of stereotypes to work against often sometimes can make our job easier, I think. With just it's all about giving you the confidence enough just to take that step right over the border. And then from there, it's as long as you're just feeling comfortable, it can be a life-changing experience. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in Ohio, of all places. People are often surprised when they see their tour guide is not Mexican. I always tell them I'm biologically not Mexican. That's it, just biologically. But I've lived in Tijuana for 12 years. And before leaving Ohio, looking at a map of San Diego and Tijuana, that was just a very fascinating thing for me. And I think Jim and I shared that.
I did from Pennsylvania, which is right next to Ohio.
So it's often sometimes the folks who come from the farthest away, who have no familiar background with Mexico or with Latin culture, that often wind up just having this spark or this passion, and it becomes just as much as home for us as I think. I don't know.
Do you think it has something to do with the fact that our beers are the same as that color?
maybe, definitely. We are from the same part of it. Anyway, so anyway.
So when we were asked to do this panel, Derrik and I, we got together and we went to Alma Verde in Lacacho, and we just started talking about this concept of the history of Tijuana and what it looked like from an economic standpoint throughout history. And we just got down to talking, and I think we were there for like 2 hours, and we just said, I don't know if we can do all this within 45 minutes. There's just so much that we found interesting. So to us, it was really no-brainer to discuss, this topic. And Derrik, doing what he's been doing with Turista Libre for the last 10 years, has a world of experience. I've been leading Immersion Living Tijuana for the last 3 years, which has really just been a hobby of mine, but working with Americans down there who are learning Spanish through an experience of the Mexican culture. So we did events, had a podcast, different meetup groups, Spanish classes, but the main thing right now has been a YouTube channel. So my wife and I were actually moving to Pennsylvania in 2 weeks. Like, can't believe it, but 10 years in San Diego, 3 years 10 years in San Diego, 3 years in Tijuana, and to go back to Pennsylvania, it's bittersweet. It's gonna be good helping family, but we fell in love with this area. Me in particular. My wife is from Guadalajara. So, Mexican culture, is nothing new to her. But I just fell in love with introducing Americans to this because it's been just some of the coolest 3 years of my life, hands down. I speak every semester at San Diego State as well in a class with Professor Victor Clark Alfaro called The Life and Culture of Tijuana. So I guess without further ado, should we get into a bit of what this is about? The title is The History of the binational region in regards to American investment. So I'm gonna submit you guys to something that's been driving my wife nuts for the last 2 weeks while I've been preparing for this, because she's not as much of a history buff like I am. So just this whole last 2 weeks, she's been hearing from me, "Hey babe, did you know that in 1885, when the first transcontinental railroad ended here in National City, it just boomed the population of San Diego threefold? And then all these Americans went to go live at the border because it was just 10 miles south, and they can do things that were illegal here in the U.S. as opposed to Mexico, like cockfighting, bullfighting, gambling, later on Prohibition era bars and things like that." And my wife would just roll her eyes and be like, "No, I didn't know any of that, hon." And so, we wanted to share a little bit of that with you guys. So do any of you guys know even, because it starts principally within the last 150 years. Like I just mentioned, there was the Transcontinental Railroad. Anybody ever hear of that, what that's about? That was basically connecting for the very first time the eastern seaboard of the United States with the west. I think it was New York, and it ended in National City. And if you've ever seen, it's just off the 5, that train station is still there. I think it's the very last one enduring from the Transcontinental Railroad from 1885. So, and it's so sad I haven't even seen it. And I'm only here for another 2 weeks. I don't know if I'm going to. But that boomed San Diego. Within 3 years, the population tripled, and there were people who said, "Hey, Mexico's right there, and we can basically make a profit."
And a lot of profit to be made. When Tijuana was founded in 1889, there were approximately 250 people. And today, that population is estimated between 2.5 million. It's very difficult to get a definite number because of it being a border city. People are constantly coming and going. But I like to compare it to kind of what happens with the Incredible Hulk. If anyone's a comic book fan, like when he gets all mad and busts out of his clothes, that's essentially how Tijuana grew. And the city essentially, even before the railroad, came to be as an indirect result, I think, of the Mexican-American War, which anyone know what that war is referred to in Mexico? See? What is it?
What is it?
In Mexico, it has a very different name.
What is it?
Or are you talking about the Pancho Villa? Or?
Before Pancho Villa. Yeah.
It was where...
1840 something, right?
Yes,
1848.
1846 to 1848, yeah. In Mexico, it's known as the North American Invasion. So Mexico was invaded by the United States. It was the first time the United States had ever invaded a foreign country by way of the sea.
And Abraham Lincoln tried to stop it.
Correct.
Fought tooth and nail as a senator to try to stop it. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States.
As a result, Mexico essentially sold for a very affordable price to make up for some debts everything that is now California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Nevada, Utah. So, yeah.
And then adding insult to injury, 1 year later, gold is discovered in San Francisco.
So,
And San Francisco, up until that point, was part of Mexico. So, yeah.
as a result, about 40 years later, Tijuana
Damn
is
United
founded.
States.
It's all very like a lot of, to put conspiracy theory on the table back then would have been,
Yeah.
heresy. But anyway, yeah, as a result, Tijuana is founded. But this little farm town that a lot of folks think that Tijuana, right, the origin of the name, Tijuana, is named after a little old lady who had a ranch, on the border, on the newly established border.
Not
Everyone knows the word Tia means aunt, right? So this woman, Aunt Jane, and she would give room and board and meals to travelers. But you want to share the?
But it's also, well, there's at least two different theories that I've heard. That one is, they're both basically Cuyamacan words, I believe. And one means by the sea, and the other means Turtle Mountain, which is for Cerro Colorado.
Correct.
So anyway, I don't know what else on economy. Derek and I, we can just diverge into anything that's not related to startup if we're not careful.
Yeah, very much so. And if you have any questions at any time, like, this is informal, right? There's 10 of us here, so please just throw your hand up. Yes,
totally.
sir.
Bio-related activities, I guess, startup. I know software is there, and I had some New York friends from New York City who had come here, I think a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So they introduced us to whom they were working with. But do we have any, or do you have any contacts, or is there any kind of, I guess, undertaking by the government, the Baja government, to I guess, improve or increase the biotech sector?
I think so. I mean, any good civic endeavor that's gonna, generate.
Genetics and that kind of field.
Yeah, I mean, there's a burgeoning medical tourism scene right now, but biomed is something that I know of, and software just makes sense because there's so many California-based businesses, or at least Western Seaboard businesses that want to operate on Pacific Coast time. They will not export, but they will outsource a lot of their workforce to Tijuana because it's within the Pacific Standard Time Zone, and labor costs are just frankly, for businesses that are looking to save overhead. They are implementing a lot of Baja California labor. A lot of deported Mexican Americans are working in call centers in Tijuana. Ever since the 1960s, Tijuana began to really get a footing on its own stable economy with the maquiladoras. So those are really big ones. And software in particular, I mean, it just makes sense because there's so many people who are able to, as Americans, do telecommute work. And it makes sense. I mean, Derek, thoughts?
Well, we're interested in CROs, actually. And if there isn't any, maybe get started.
There is a...
is there a hub for them?
Well, Mexico has a National Institute for Biostudies, and it's run by it's administered by the federal government. And I'm sure many private sectors, private investors as well, play off of that. The uniqueness of Tijuana being so far away from the capital city, but so close to the United States. In a lot of ways, it's a launch pad for more American, maybe a satellite for Mexico City, and then.
Baja California didn't even become a recognized state of the Republic of Mexico until 1952.
1952, correct.
It was a territory, technically, before that, which even actually, this leads into the very first hippodromo, which the horse race track, which was just 400 yards from the international border, was built in 1916. And it lasted only 2 weeks until a huge flood came. But it was a primarily American invested endeavor. You guys ever hear of John D. Spreckles, like the Spreckles Center here in San Diego? He was a big contributor to the very first hippodromo in Tijuana. And just to give you a concept, the federal government did not approve the construction and operation of the first hippodromo. Nonetheless, Governor Cantu, who was the governor of Baja California territory at that time, was at the opening inauguration of the hippodromo. And at that time, 1916, there was about 500 people living in Tijuana, I think. And just to give it a scale, though, there were 10,000 people who showed up to the very first opening of this American invested business in Tijuana. And for the next number of decades, the big thing was prohibition and it was gambling. In the 1920s, when Prohibition was happening for 13 years, from 1920 through 1913, Tijuana became the most visited city in the world. There was so much money in Tijuana, Mexico in the 1920s. They advertised the largest purse horse race at the Bouldermo for $100,000. In a prize in 1920-ish.
Correct?
Say it again?
I'll go into the casino together with some Hollywood celebrities.
And the Marx Brothers would go there, Bing Crosby would go there, Clark Gable would go there, Charlie Chaplin, all these Hollywood people will go. There were planes in and out of Agua Caliente constantly. After that, through the 50s, there was no real major, there were no real major Mexican construction projects in the city. The dam was American funded. Although there was a stipulation that 80% of the workforce had to be Mexican, it was still American funded, as well as the hot springs back in the 1880s. And the casinos, Casa de la Cultura, that was all an American building project. The very first Mexican project was Puerta Mexico in, I think, in the 1960s. That was the very first Mexican-funded major project in Tijuana. So after that was when Tijuana just said, look, after Prohibition and after the gambling laws changed, our economies just tanked. We have to come up with something that is better than us depending solely on the United States of America.
And these days it's kind of a back and forth, right? We are so intertwined with each other. I think that's one thing in Tijuana. It's very obvious, but over here it's easy to forget. Yes?
By American investment, do you mean the government or just private?
Typically private. Yeah, it was typically private.
Would it be like the bank? So if I want to go to the bank, I want to take out a loan, and I want to invest it in TJ, is that possible?
I think at that era, yeah, it was just happening. There was all sorts of stuff. From what I understand, up through the 70s, pesos weren't even accepted in Tijuana. Like, you're talking everything was American. It was so far away from Mexico City, and the population of San Diego was always bigger than Tijuana by dozens of thousands, up until the 1960s. And then that reversed. Up until now, Tijuana is bigger than San Diego, and it's growing more, has more movement, has more industry right now. The maquiladoras, since I think the 1995, they were considered the television capital of the world because of all the televisions being produced out of there. I think all Toyota Tacoma trucks come out of there. It's refrigerators. It's the world capital for digital thermometers. I'm such a nerd.
Toyota trucks from Tecate.
We're such nerds on Tijuana, dude. That's how
From Tecate.
Say it again?
Toyota trucks from Tecate.
Tecate is another one.
Is out that way.
Mexicali also.
Yeah.
But Tijuana primarily, because I think Tijuana is most of the discussion here because, we're dealing with, a San Diego startup entrepreneurs. But yes, throughout the border of Mexico, whether you go to Texas, whether you're in Arizona, they're going to have equivalents.
And even going back to what you were talking about, the casino, ever since the 20s, that was essentially Tijuana's first economy. And so it came as a big blow in 1940 when the president at the time outlawed gambling in the whole country.
Lázaro Cárdenas.
Lázaro Cárdenas. And so Tijuana's first economy, which was, like you were saying, so much money was coming into Tijuana and also providing jobs for a very quickly growing city, was taken away from the people. So lots of unrest at those days.
A lot. And, it's one of those things that it has its all connections. I mean, we're talking about the economics, financial investment, but there's culture, there's history, there's political stuff, that it's all kind of connected. And today, I think in the 1920s and the 1930s, it was very obvious to Americans how to invest in Tijuana. Now, I think one needs to be a bit more creative and be able to read in between the lines. For example, medical tourism is happening, and that is a big industry for Tijuana and for Baja and for Mexico. But there's also ways that Americans can partner with these firms to take care of the Americans and other folks internationally who want to come and visit. There's folks who will come in from out of the country to go to Tijuana for some form of medical tourism, maybe Canadians, people like that. And they'll also want to go and visit Southern California. And I don't know there may be something, but I think that's just one form of an example of how Americans, entrepreneurs here in San Diego can look at potential opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, these days, ever since NAFTA was passed and the North American Free Trade Agreement, and all these factories are producing, and basically, a truck like a Tacoma can be produced in Mexico for a fraction of the cost of what it would cost over here. So that keeps pricing low. Ever since that all started, Tijuana just started to really grow, and it's still one of the, if not the fastest growing city in the whole country. About 50% of the population, who falls in between 20 years old to 70 years old, is a migrant. So most of those coming from other parts of Mexico. The major states that are found in Tijuana: Sinaloa, Jalisco, Michoacán, Sonora, and Baja California Sur. But ever since the late 1800s, with the railroad being constructed, Chinese immigrants were the first wave of international folks
Out
to
of
start.
Mexicali. I can't believe I forgot to mention that one at the very beginning. That Yasmin and I, we were on your trip to the Turista Libre to Mexicali.
It's one of our
annual Chinese New Year in February. Go with Turista Libre.
Yeah.
There was maybe 20 or 30 of us, I think.
It was
at least
a big
20
trip,
who went on that trip.
Yeah.
It's a great time. We can talk more later.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a unique history. Yes, go ahead. No,
I
it's
just have a question,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of technical.
Huh?
In the sense that, let's say I am a company who's based out here in San
Mhm.
Diego, and I hire somebody who lives in Tijuana,
Mhm.
then which minimum wage am I paying them?
That's a good question.
And they're working in San Diego?
Yes.
You would be paying them San Diego minimum wage.
Okay.
Because chances are that person is also a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
Tijuana is home to the largest, I believe, population of U.S. citizens living outside the United States. But most of those people are, like I said earlier, I'm not biologically Mexican, but aesthetically I think I feel more like it. A lot of those people are
You
the
do have
same.
the Pancho Villa mustache.
I'm working
going
on it, you guys. I'm working because, it's very common for folks, middle class and upper class folks in Tijuana, to have their children just north of the border in Chula Vista and Hillcrest, and then they take the baby right out of the hospital and back to Tijuana, where they're raised. And by doing so, then they don't have to go through visa interviews with the U.S. consulate. So as a Mexican citizen, just to exit exit Mexico and to come to the United States as a consumer, just to go shopping, you basically have to prove that you have a certain amount of money in the bank, that you have some sort of financial obligation to return to Mexico, that you're not coming over here to work under the table. And so by families being able to have their children over here, they're having to bypass that process altogether. And sometimes it's just as simple as, like, we want to take the kids to Disneyland, but we don't want to have to worry about, getting denied our visas to just drive up to LA for the day. So anyway, because of that, the person you would be hiring is most likely already approved for work in the US because they're a US citizen, as far as I would understand.
If they're not?
If they're not, that's a good question that could be up for debate with the person.
I think it's just a matter of where they're working at
Mm.
and under what status.
Hmm.
So
I think
based on our experience, if you hire a local,
No.
obviously you pay local wages. But if you hire anybody, let's say, who lives here and who has the right to work here, but they'll have to agree to getting paid the local wages in Tijuana. You just post your ad accordingly.
Because
And-
usually, the way you connect is, let's say, AngelList or Crunchbase. Those are the websites that you're using. And you usually post your employment information based on what the metrics is on that website, which will be based in currency of your country, which will be San Diego in my case.
The minimum, just to clear it up, the minimum wage in Baja California, in the state where Tijuana is located, was just recently raised. I believe it's 100. Yeah, it's just doubled, and now it's like, what, 140 pesos
Yes.
a day,
Yeah.
right? A day. So that's about $7 a day.
Yeah.
So chances are, yes, yeah,
That's really
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
when we say
you want to know what cops are paid down there? Men and women who put on bulletproof vests to go to work,
how much?
66 pesos an hour, which is less than $4
Yeah.
an hour.
That's another good one. Yeah, just one thing. This is not gonna be like talking good about TJs, but the minimum wage is just only gonna be part of your salary.
Okay.
You already have like different kind of something else they're gonna give you. So if even working on $1 you earn minimum wage, nobody's gonna go to that $1. So actually, a salary right now is gonna be around maybe $700 a week.
Okay,
So $700 a week is gonna be like around something.
that's pretty decent.
Yeah.
And-
That is very decent, because as a school teacher working under the table in Tijuana, I was earning the equivalent of $4 an hour. Yes, yes. So
You were teaching
I
English,
should have
right?
been in a maquila. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
teaching English for 4 years in a secondary school in Tijuana.
Cool.
But yeah, that's why things, we're very surprised as people coming from the developed world. When we go to a developing country, everything's so cheap. Oh, I can have a great meal for, $3, $4, whatever. But things are much, much lower when it comes to what you're being paid as well, too. Yeah.
And if I could add, there's a concept I'm going to call just global kindness. Just this concept of if there's any Americans that I speak with, and I meet them, I'll meet them at a coffee shop in Tijuana, and they're down there because they want to start a call center, having a conversation. And obviously that's just the business they want to do, but there's all sorts of different businesses that any Americans or others from other nations can do in Tijuana and Baja. And I would say, I think a great example is living in Tijuana is kind of like living in Groupon. Like if Groupon was your world and every restaurant was like half off.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. Like, you go out to like a craft beer place, you want to get a good craft beer. It's typically going to be like half of what you're going to pay here. So in the States where you are going to tip 20%, I'm going to say for us as Americans who are down there living there on a wage that is much more than the average Mexican is earning. On average, we're making 4 times as much money. Okay, I'm gonna go down there. I'm gonna say, dude, tip more than just 20%. Dude, like they're frankly like breaking their balls to serve you, and they're making so much less than what you would be doing if you were doing their job in the United States. Like let's fork over a little bit more, and just like Mexico has treated me so well. Derrik, I know it's treated you so well, and like it's just such a great warm nation, and the people, just like here, deserve a great living wage. They have their own family to take care of, like a lot of us do, and just, so that's what comes to my mind. Any entrepreneur who wants to go down there and only proliferate from the fact that, I can pay them like the minimum and that's it, I'd say, please don't go to Mexico. Just my opinion.
I always, I think I often deal with the stereotype of being a non-Mexican living in Mexico, that I'm there because it's cheap. And that's a really frustrating thing, because before I even packed up my things and moved across the border officially, like I made a list of reasons why I was doing this. Number 1, I want to speak Spanish fluently. Number 2, this is an opportunity to live in 2 countries on a daily basis. Number 3, I'm in love and he lives over there. Number 4, okay, rent is a little bit less over there. But even now, 12 years later, I tell people, if you're like thinking of moving just because it's a lower cost of living, and you folks live there too, so you can attest to this perhaps, that I don't think you'll last that long. There's so much more that goes into life on that side of the border. Just to have a counterpart, sort of middle class living over there.
But it's so cool.
Exactly, it's the
so
energy
cool.
of the city, the spirit of it, the ingenuity of the people, the humility. It's like very humble innovation, I think, too. That's really inspiring. So.
And just one thing, just considering time, and thank you guys for all coming out here today. There was definitely one point that I wanted to at least finish up from my end before, Derrik would obviously add anything here. Human history teaches us that there's no global superpower that's guaranteed to be number 1 forever. Whether we want to talk about ancient Rome, we want to talk about, I'm totally boning it right now on world history. Egyptians, whether anyone, no one's guaranteed to be number 1 forever, right? And the Aztecs, we could talk a bit about that.
Rise and fall, right?
And so, when something happens, whether that's a natural occurring event or a man-made occurring event, it can be really good to just know your neighbors and be on friendly terms. And there's some things happening right now geopolitically in our country that it's not as great as it's been. On our YouTube channel, on Immersion Living, I made a 3-minute video on why we have this huge Abraham Lincoln statue in Tijuana. How many of you guys have ever seen the Abraham Lincoln statue in Tijuana? Abraham Lincoln is a great example of an American president who put his neck on the line to help out Mexico. And it was mutual between he and Benito Juarez. And it's a beautiful story, and it's why I made the video about it. But, we have examples right now where, I don't know if I want to use the word crisis yet, but it's certainly approaching that, considering ocean water quality spew off that's coming out of Tijuana, which obviously that's something that within Tijuana needs to be fixed. It's one of those things that obviously isn't changing overnight, but what's happening is, from what I understand, the flow of that water is going north up into the United States. And from what I understand, Mexico isn't too crazy about the idea of trying to work with the United States to cover this, because frankly, our own president is saying, we're putting this big wall, getting these, people with this color skin who don't have papers, getting them out of here. And it's just this thing that right now is like, we need good relations because frankly, we're not going to be number one forever. And Tijuana is growing so much economically with its output, with its creativity, with art, with industry, with so much cool stuff. Tijuana is such a good, beautiful city. It certainly has very many unique challenges, of which, frankly, a lot of it is us are to blame here in the United States because of, an appetite for illegal drugs coming over the border. But get to know your neighbor, learn some Spanish while you're here in San Diego. Go do Turista Libre, go see it for yourself, and it's, I happen to have copies of this book. This book basically made me move to Tijuana. It's the first time I actually got to know about Derrik, too. Derrik is one of the contributors of this. And it's written in both English and Spanish, so you can learn all about the language, the culture, and it's, I love Tijuana. And I love this region, the binational region. We have so much to be thankful for here, and just keep it going as long as it can be.
If anyone is looking to go into a new startup in the city or in the region, I think environmental, care in the future is going to be the new thing.
Totally.
Like it's something that's been ignored for so long, and one of the downsides of the binational industry that we have here is that just the exploitation of natural resources in a place where water, for example, is already scarce. So, and what you're speaking about, this water plant that's about 20 kilometers south of the border?
I think even less.
Just that's a great example of the need for updating our infrastructure and for the need of forward thinking when it comes to the environment and trash disposal, recycling, all of it. So if anyone's in those sectors, please come.
Any questions right now? Hector, you didn't need to do too much moderating in this round.
Oh, this is going to be easy. Only people like
You're already thinking about the after party, I got it.
Yeah, but getting to know people like you, they are so open, they can be able to talk about different aspects, and being a U.S. citizen saying, I love this about TJ, really makes me so happy because we have opportunities and stuff like that. But yeah, that love of TJ, that love of Mexico, as I'm trying to promote Tijuana, man, we're doing the same thing. We love the same city. We can also talk about San Diego, how they being, how do you have so much industry based on how the community is pretty well connected? It's since a lot of time you're gonna be the nerdy guys, the old dates. I don't know about dates, but we have been one community for a long time. So 1920s. We have everything of prohibited over here. You can do it over there. You have a military base over here. It's a military city, but even with that, everybody used to go there for the food, for the culture, for drinking or whatever. But it's built out so much culture. Being at the just forefront of the United States and being so far away from Mexico, it promotes so many cultural opportunities.
And just 150 years ago, there was no physical wall, barrier, even indication of where exactly is Mexico and where exactly is the United States. And the very first time that there was a need for it was in the 1880s when there was the difference in the laws, and there was basically a hotel, casino, drinking, boozing establishment right there, and people would be causing ruckus on the Mexican side and then just run up to the other end of the long bar in the United States, and Mexican officials can't do anything, and vice versa. And it was just kind of we need to figure out a solution to this. And so the wall, I'm not necessarily against a wall. I can understand a nation, you want to protect what is good, but when it becomes this thing where it's lost sight of that.
The inhumanity behind it, I think.
Well put, Derrik.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting to compare in other countries around the world that are living on borders and where there is no physical barrier separating the two. If you look at their economies, the economies are a bit more equal, right? The US and Canada, for example, the standard of living is on par. So that would be the mission, is to be able to bring Mexico up to a level, or the United States. I don't think we want to go back down, right? But to even out so people don't want to be leaving and crossing the border, A lot of people over there love living there, but they live because that's the only option that they have,
And ideally,
families.
it could be a win-win situation. But at the same time, I mean, the United States, typically our pockets here are a little deeper, and it would be really great to show some more of that love in whatever sort of creative way that any of us could be called to our neighbors, brothers, and sisters south of here, and really anywhere else globally. Like, again, it's about a global essence of kindness. So really, whatever sort of, whether it's a people group, another nation that's on your heart, like, what can we do to help one another out? You've got a question, sir?
Yeah. Have you guys witnessed like a change in perception either between Americans to Mexicans or Mexicans to Americans within the past 3 years?
Because of everything happening in the U.S.?
Ooh.
I personally know, even when the elections were happening, being in Mexico City, my partner's based in Mexico City now, so he and I are back and forth pretty often. It's there that people are a bit more, it's ironic that people, I think, are a bit more informed about what, is going on this side of the border when it comes to politics and things that are being said and whatnot. And just even one woman in a market stopped me once, and she's like, how can you people even have him on the list of people that would be considered to be, and I'm like, I live here for a reason. I live here for a reason, there's many reasons. But in Tijuana, I think not so much, because people know, just like anywhere, like, it's people that they love, not governments. So we as people are more than our governments. I mean, in theory, we should be the ones taking the actions to change our governments, right? But
It's of the people.
Hostility toward me personally on a day-to-day basis, no. I think people can see through that, pretty easily.
And most Mexicans know that most Americans are not like their president.
Exactly.
They know it. And if we're having this conversation regarding interactions we're having in Mexico, those of us as Americans who are more like our president in character and personality aren't hanging out in
Aren't
Mexico.
going to be there anyway, yeah.
Like,
So
they're not kicking it around at Mercado Hidalgo
No.
and like
It's
looking for
actually-
like
no.
yaca.
Actually, the vendors at this market
caña.
that he just mentioned get upset because they sell lots of piñatas. It's a very like folkloric market, and there's piñatas of Donald Trump, and so tourists are taking photos with with Donald Trump, like this, and the vendors are getting mad because they're not buying the piñata. And so anyway, and then like one of our favorite places to eat is it's a food truck park, and it's called Telefónica.
Yes.
You guys have been at Telefónica, I'm saying. The billboard, right? Who's on the billboard?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Food has no walls. but
Food
this-
has no walls. Yeah.
It's a billboard, giant billboard of Donald Trump, a cartoon of Donald Trump, holding tacos. He has a taco in one hand, and he's doing this with his other hand, right? And it says, "Food has no walls." So even the fact that we're able to, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people see this on this boulevard every day, probably. So it's something to laugh at, I think, too.
And you know what I love, and I think is a great expression of, if you were to just take a snapshot of like, how do you describe the culture, the differences, all this and that, take a snapshot of the wall at Playa de Tijuana, and you can see there's festivals and there's things and there's all this life and there's people painting on the side of the wall and there's just all this activity. And then you go on the U.S. side, and there's like a patrolman on a quad and like a couple people on horses, and sometimes like racist geopolitical groups from East County.
Yeah.
And like, and everyone is like over 50 years old, and you're like,
Yeah.
thank God this is a dying generation mentality.
It is very surreal. If you have not been out there, that's a great way to
Totally.
start your experience in the city.
And they got to see Plaza Monumental, which is, hey, you didn't go see Carlos Rivera last week, did you? You would have loved it, dude.
Yeah.
It was so good, dude. Dude. With my wife and I went. My wife, she loves Carlos Rivera, and she was just gushing over. I was like, hey, you need to relax. But like that plaza, that monument, they're demolishing it.
Yeah.
And they're going to be building a commercial plaza.
Not a surprise.
And that bull ring is the fourth largest in the world, capacity of 25,000 people, and is the only seaside bull ring in the world. It was built in the 70s, I think, remarkably fast. But now it's...
Just because bullfighting has become, it's not making the profit it used to make back in the days. So, in many border cities along the border, or probably anywhere in the world, when something is, built for profit, it's not making a profit anymore. Instead of saving it for historic preservation or turning it into a park or something, it'll be torn down.
And obviously it'll want to be saved, but it just takes up so much land.
So
That's-
to see this architect, whether I'm not for bullfighting, but it's a really cool piece of architecture to see as well. And it's actually right there by the border fence where it goes into the ocean. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know they got to see Sekoot, like any American, like 101. If anybody wants to just go do a cool day trip, go see Sekoot, I'd say. Okay.
5
Cool.
minutes.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Hector.
Yeah.
Well,
It does fly. So
Yeah.
if anyone has any other questions, I keep looking at the one person in the room who has not been to Tijuana. I'm sorry. What do you think about like the stigmas? Do you have ideas about it? Like I always like to talk to people who've
Well, I
never been
just
before.
haven't had time to go.
Okay.
But definitely not planning on it. I'll have a
Okay.
lot of friends. I'm a student at the University of San Diego,
Okay,
so a lot
cool.
of my students, international friends, commute every day to school,
Mhm.
and like I hang out with them. So
That's
it's
awesome.
really cool to like. I've had chances where I can go
Uh-huh.
with them, but things kind of weighing I can't.
Things happen,
But
yeah,
it's not because
yeah.
I don't want to. Or
Right,
because
right.
I have a passport. My mom does not
Mhm.
care. It's
Yeah.
more like I just haven't had the time. But
Because adulting, right?
Yeah.
Adulting.
We have responsibilities now.
What do you study at USD?
international business and marketing.
You don't know Rachel Christensen, do you? She's in the Center of Peace Studies.
No,
Okay,
I
she's
just
very
started my
connected with
first year,
Tijuana.
So I'm still doing like the core classes right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
so,
Okay.
Well, welcome.
yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, and for any of you who grabbed the sticker, at the bottom is our website, and there's a contact page link on there too, where you can send those emails, go right to me. So if you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to reach out. How can people get in touch with you?
Primarily YouTube, just YouTube Immersion Living Tijuana, and it's immersion like like immersion program. And I went with the name because I wanted to do some sort of an immersion program, but I realized like the traditional immersion program, I think it's possible in Tijuana, but it's just such a different vibe and dynamic that the majority of Americans there wouldn't be living there and studying Spanish full time. It's like a part-time kind of thing. And I just fell in love with doing videos. Like we had been doing events and podcasts and Spanish classes, different things like that, different socials, but primarily on the YouTube channel, Immersion Living.
What's your plan for the channel as you leave?
I'm going to be doing it from there. I got so much stuff I still want to talk about. And my wife can't hear all of it, so I got to put myself in front of a camera and do it that way. Edit it out so you guys can all watch it. I'd say please watch the video on Abraham Lincoln. And then I just finished halfway through editing right now an interview with Paola Avila, who's the Vice President of International Business Affairs with the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, who just spoke an hour ago in the other room, because they do so much great binational work, and we talk about this sort of topic as well. And it's kind of a lighthearted, funny interview too, so I think it'd be cool. But there's so many different things. Who knows about Colosio? Luis Donaldo Colosio. I want to do a video on him because that was the very coolest thing I ever experienced in Tijuana, was visiting his monument. And sadly, it's not something that I can suggest to most Americans to go and do. It's in Lomas Taurinas. It's like, I had these two kids who were there. It's a 3-mile hike from our house where my wife and I live in La Libertad. Skateboarded there one day. And I was getting ready on my longboard to go down into Lomas Taurinas, and there were these two neighborhood kids who were playing soccer, and they were like, "Señor, ¿qué hace usted aquí?" And I said to them, I was like, "Pues voy a visitar al monumento de Colosio. ¿Ustedes saben dónde está?" Y me dijeron, ya sí, deje usted que nosotros podemos ser su guía, porque es peligroso.
They were
aquí
worried
todavía.
about you. Oh.
They were. So I want to make a video about that, and I got a lot of cool photos, and it was such a cool thing because I didn't see. There's two different Tijuanas. There's a Tijuana where you will see Americans at, it's very American influence, where Americans live, and there's money, and there's a heightened sense of security and safety, and then there's a Tijuana where you're not going to see other Americans, where you're in Lomas Taurinas, or you're in 2000 or Florida or other places where it's just such a different world. And I love that about Tijuana. It's like, I was in Lomas Taurinas, I felt like I was back in Guadalajara, but a dicey neighborhood of Guadalajara, which was kind of fun though. I like the sense of adventure.
It's the
it made it back alive.
So many migrants that they basically bring that aesthetic with them.
Yes.
Yeah. So definitely.
Yes. Well, I guess guys from Pennsylvania and Ohio, it's where we grew up. So for us to have this is just so different.
It is. For me, I think it was always just a place that I felt more at home, and there's the reality of it all, the realness.
And it says on. I've told many Mexicans in Guadalajara who have told me that they want to come and live in the United States, and I've told them you're certainly welcome to do that, but I'm going to tell you, I see more smiles on the faces of more people here in your country than I do back in my own. I'm telling you, you're not going to necessarily be missing something by never going. Anyway.
Cool. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you folks very much.
Cool. Thank you guys.